Baby, baby.
Hello, listeners. It's your boy, NotoriousSA, aka Steve Anderson, aka Slav Ukraine. It's been a while. I looked in this app of mine to see the last time I tried to do something, and it was December of last year. And I did record something, and then I stopped. And by the time I looked at it again, the thing I was talking about, January 6th, a bunch more stuff has happened on that. So, I'm thinking I'll get to it, but maybe later. This is more of a getting things started and going again type of podcast. Be talking about current events. Thinking, obviously, talk about Ukraine and Russia, current Supreme Court hearings, and then an update in Illinois regarding something pretty close and personal to me. So, I do appreciate anybody who actually is listening to this. At the end of last year, I got some data about who was listening to this, and it's weird because I can tell there are people listening in lots of places that make sense, and a lot of places that are actually really far away. Apparently, this podcast is listened to in 3 countries, so we're international, which is excellent. And it just goes to show the progress that we've made technologically over these many years. I posted on Twitter last night that I joined in 2008, September 2008 to be precise. The first tweet was because I'm bored, or I joined this service because I was bored. I very much at the time thought that Twitter would be kind of like, a little side project, because in my lifetime the amount of social media websites that have come and gone with the promise of being the next thing has been, so many. But I thought Facebook was going to be where it's at. And let's be clear, Facebook's still around. It still matters, but Twitter took on a very different sort of relevance. Mostly due to the former president using it as his primary communication method, and of course, we all remember how that went. Anyway, thank you to all the listeners out there. The fact that now in this day and age when, as the old saying goes, another podcast, great, that's exactly what we needed. At least this allows people a creative outlet to talk about the things they want to talk about. And I think about in my lifetime the avenues for people to truly express their own opinions in a way that other people could hear. We've had, as time has gone on, we've had things like phones, the radio, computers, and now the internet to really increase the amount of connectivity we have to one another. We have the ability to basically communicate for free across the world now in the social media age, where you can be friends and follow people all over the world, and as long as you have a connection to the internet, or maybe some sort of cellular connection, but you can talk to anybody anywhere for free. Free, quote unquote, with the service obviously selling you advertisements, but still. In terms of human history, the ability for us to connect, and not only that, but connect on our own terms in our own way, with our own creative interpretations, has never been greater. While things like cancel culture and questions about the First Amendment are still valid, we should also know that the opportunity for speech, for people to speak their minds, to speak their piece, to speak their stories, I don't think has ever been greater. And while this podcast may only be listened to by a select few people, if they even still listen to it, because I obviously have been busy, and trying to update this when you are trying to live life can be hard, and it's not your job to do it. It's a lot. When you're not getting paid, it's not the primary focus, unless you really, really need to do it. Sometimes things like this will take a back seat, but I digress. I appreciate anybody who does listen. And of course, you can always reach out to me on all of these free social media sites with our instant communication, or you can go to my website and reach out or shoot an email at notorioussapodcast@gmail.com. It's all in the links, all in the descriptions, because there's so many different services this is on. It's just truly an amazing time to be alive if you think about it. The fact that I, just some random guy, could have all this at my disposal and have people in multiple countries and across the United States listening to me and hopefully taking something from it it's just truly great. But thank you. And I guess this is season 3. Alright, well, since I've last spoken about anything at all, the world has taken many different turns, and I think the biggest story that everybody knows and everyone is talking about is the war between Russia and Ukraine. And I don't have to tell you the build up to it, but if you haven't already heard, Russia has been invading other countries since 2008, Crimea in 2014, and this year decided that basically they were going to, quote, denazify Ukraine and launch a major invasion. And with the obvious asterisk that despite a war playing out in real time in the aforementioned social media platforms I was talking about, YouTube, between YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter, that average citizens who have the phones and the connectivity and access to an internet are posting things that are happening in their country, and we're watching missiles fly into buildings filled with children and soldiers trying to occupy streets thinking they're liberators, but it turns out they are very much not welcome. And the entire world has essentially unified around Ukraine. It's crazy that this is even happening, but it is. And the fact that it's playing out for us in real time, and it's serious, and I don't want to paint it off as just entertainment, but we haven't really had such a ability to document a major conflict between two nations in a long time. And when you're thinking about like the last few times that we've had major films of military conflicts, even as recently as the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, even now, with the ability to post these things and live stream them, we can basically see what's happening on the ground in real time from multiple sources. And of course, this leads to things of, verification of information, and obviously there's disinformation being thrown out of it. A lot of it's coming from Russia. Ukraine is throwing out its own propaganda, but as far as most credible independent sources can tell, the Ukrainian government is strong in its defense. The Ukrainian people have been united in their defense. The Russian attack has not gone as planned. It's stalled. And the strongman image Putin has been projecting for the last 30 years is all of a sudden starting to crack. Now, in Russia, the place where the only thing that really matters to him which is control, respect, and command of the government and the population, they have control over the media, and we can see that protesters are boldly standing out, knowing full well that they can go to jail for years for protesting this illegal war. The fact that so many people are doing it is a sign of bravery, but as far as we know, the majority of the population of Russia apparently is in favor of this because they believe that they're trying to denazify Ukraine. And obviously that's one of the hurdles of them living in an information bubble, is that we have to hope that between Western media breaking through and people in Russia broadcasting the truth, that people will figure out that thousands of their people are dying for no good reason. Because Vladimir Putin wants more land. It's as simple and as cold and calculative and brutal as that. And even now, this whole war has been a major crystallizing event. Because I think especially during the last few years, people have had concerns about the world we live in, specifically I guess you would call it the classical liberal post-World War II order that's been established, with now an unprecedented degree of integration in free market capitalism. And the free market capitalism obviously doesn't apply everywhere. And this is part of the problem, is that there are nations who use and abuse free market systems to try to get what they want. Russia obviously is a major exporter of energy, and energy is a commodity that is always in need. And of course, Europe needs energy. It's a major population center. And since they have cut back on their own production, they now have to rely on this nuclear-armed, historically hostile, large nation-state that always wanted to be a big player on the world stage, and its leaders have tried to push some sort of version of the world they think, because it works here, it would work in Europe and beyond, and you don't need a whole history lesson here. The bigger deal is that despite being integrated into the modern economy, Russia has actually now been effectively cut off from it really fast. And this is one of the perks of this new interconnected, globalized world, is that while Russia has for years had people, its oligarchs, its elites, collecting large sums of money, possibly illegally, and then taking that money and laundering it through Western nations, the United States, Canada, Europe, real estate, the yachts, the college tuition for their children, the getting the hell out of the place where they live. Because here's the thing, I know there's a lot of, Interest in the Dead, it tells me this, there's definitely a lot of self-described progressives who listen to this show, so thank you for that. I know that there's this whole kind of assumption about capitalism and how it's inherently bad, or we're in sort of a late-stage capitalistic world, and I gotta tell you something, as a little aside here, when this new world comes up and people in countries that, post their own communist, Soviet dictatorship governments, start to turn into more of a free market, integrated into the world place, and their people start making money, like large sums of money. Think again, Russia, China, other developing nations where certain elites have cashed in and made a lot of money. Think about how that wealth is obtained. And understand that the double-edged sword of that is that the same state that allowed them to get there can easily take that all away from them. Like that. They can murder you in some cases. Or you can be disappeared, or caught up, or vanished. Despite all your massive wealth. Which here in America, massive wealth is equated with basic immunity from the law and being above it, although no one is above the law. You all know that one. But in these places, wealth doesn't even make you safe from your own government. From to take you for no reason at all. And guess what happens when they see the benefits of this integrated capitalist world and accumulate their wealth? They want to keep said wealth. As a matter of fact, many of the wealthy people in these developing nations are not corrupt and are actually super honest, good business people who just capitalized, saw the opportunities where they were available and made money, but live in a country where, again, the protections of the individual and its focus on its individual liberty and, systems of due process were not front and center of its development and expansion. And despite being one of the wealthiest people in the world, if the law says that the government can take you in the middle of the night and hold you for no reason and seize all your assets, are you really even that free? Even if you're worth that much money? So of course what happens is that they try to leave those places which can take everything that they've ever worked for and come to a place like the United States, where obviously wealth is not only respected but admired, and everybody loves to talk about the wealthy. The immigration system encourages it with being able to essentially buy yourself an immigration buy-in. It's a real thing. It's a real visa. Look it up. I'll put a link for it in the description. There's a thing about it, but I can't think about it right now. It's too complicated. Anyway, we get where this is going, right? Now we see what happens when these corrupt countries are caught red-handed doing terrible things, and we, the rest of the free world led by the United States, through organizations like NATO and all that jazz, are able to respond. Not with war, not with declarations of war and sending in troops, but with economic sanctions, with our private sector both punishing Russia and trying to assist Ukraine. We have international allies, again, part of NATO and other places, acting together to spend more money, send equipment, vigorously remind Russia that any incursion into NATO territory will have a swift response. And it being on the border but not a NATO member obviously means that NATO is front and center now, and it reminds people why NATO was established in the first place. Sure, it was to counteract the Soviet Union, but in this modern world, the Soviet Union doesn't exist, but Russia exists, and Russia is headed by a man who was preeminent from the Soviet Union. The world is better with NATO, especially when countries are allied, and the risk of many people going to war is just significantly lower, and people forget that, but Now people are reminded why we have NATO in the first place, why it was important, and why the former President Trump, despite losing an election and proving no voter fraud and being the subject of multiple inquiries, including January 6th, is somehow still being mentioned as someone who is considered worthy of talking to on this. And now we've seen what happens when these grifters and these shameless charlatans who are part of the Republican Party, quote unquote, and Trump bootlickers have to defend Vladimir Putin. And when I say defending, that ranges from actual defenses of Vladimir Putin, being justified in what he's doing, which he's not, to, anti-Putin, which is, this is Biden's fault or NATO's fault somehow, but Putin's also bad, which is a dishonest take. And of course, people who are just, straight up partisans and saying Joe Biden is at fault for this, even though it's a foreign government in a foreign land. And they still approve of Putin more than Joe Biden. And it's just, why would you approve of a foreign dictator who's murdering children over the president of the country you live in? But, whatever. There's a lot of that stuff that turns out the vast majority of the American public and most Republicans don't agree with. And now is a good opportunity to remind people what I've been saying and what others have been saying for years now, is that these people never actually cared about the Constitution or freedom or democracy or any of the things that we hold dear. They've always been dishonest grifters the entire time. And the fact that they haven't been shamed into irrelevance and cast aside as an irrelevant political movement, in fact, probably have more influence now than ever, is just a reminder that lots of people will exist with terrible ideas and terrible ways of executing those ideas and being essentially considered a joke, yet somehow still find success and relevance. It is what it is, I guess. That's life, folks. Sometimes the Charlie Kirks of the world just continue to fail upwards with no discernible explanation. The fact that people I know and respect Charlie Kirk, it's a difference of opinion, I guess. Try not to get into it. They know, I know, we're not going to talk about it. But the idea that, which again, not that long ago, in the recent memory before Donald Trump, was that America good, Russia bad, as in our political opposition is better than foreign governments that have historically been hostile, has been the norm. But in this, unfortunately, this is under that double-edged sword of the internet I was speaking about earlier, is that there is a certain doubling down contrarianism culture that makes people like Charlie Kirk, Candace Owens, large portions of Twitter, essentially so caught up in a specific, interesting, they use the word narrative a lot, but they themselves often are trapped in a narrative that usually is of the same few words. Woke, corrupt, Democrat, freedom, Christian. It's a series of buzzwords, and of course Trump. Right? That's the entire worldview summed up in a few words, and you try to make it cover everything, and it's dull, it's repetitive, it's no longer fresh or interesting. And I think categorically above all, it's now been proven wrong in the real world. It's very clear from what's currently happening in the world, despite what is being spun, is that while most of the American government, even while Trump was president, is obviously pro-Ukraine, the president himself is more pro-Putin by virtue of the president, the person, liking Putin. Because he flatters him and he's petty. It's that simple. It's literally that simple. He's a selfish person. And it puts American security and national interest in jeopardy. And you can't just let a sad, selfish, petty person jeopardize American national security. Because as it seems very clear, the former president wanted to and planned on leaving NATO, the very alliance now critically aligned and trying to work to prevent Russia from taking over Ukraine without going to war with them. And Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, the comedian, now turned wartime president, who is caught in the ultimate battle of existence and is begging the world to send him everything they can so that he can fight his own battles. Ukraine is not a perfect country, obviously. Ukraine's had problems. We don't have to go into the whole history of that now. But Ukraine is trying to be a better place, and Zelensky is trying to bring them into the modern world, like so many countries before them. And we see that they're being dragged down by Russia, and we see it's obvious that Russia is worse, is the aggressor, is the backwaters of democracy, and yet people are equating them. People are saying both sides are at fault, or Zelensky is the bad guy in this situation. It's insanity. And any time before Donald Trump, it would have been insanity. But again, the center of gravity reflects around one selfish person, and now all these other people believe they have to try to take this contrarianism to its logical extreme and then defend the least defensible person in the world, Vladimir Putin. Because they have to never just agree on the most basic things, because for some reason your domestic political opposition is worse than a foreign dictator. It's crazy to think that. But that's where we're at. It's sad. You'd think that this is a pretty open and shut case of good guy, bad guy, U.S. on side of good guys. Sure, there's far more complicated history behind that, but at the end of the day, that basic breakdown is still the truth. And if the truth matters, which it should, in an age of limitless communication and information being shared instantly all over the place all at once, is that if we can do that, if we have that ability, never before in human history to such an extent, that at the very least we owe it to ourselves to put the truth out there. If information is going to be that fast, that prevalent, that easy to be shared and go viral, the most we can do, the least we could do, the best we could do, is to have it be the truth. other things in the news. Currently, there is a confirmation hearing going for Supreme Court nominee Judge Ketanji Brown. And, you know, everybody sees clips of it on Twitter, on the news. They see that this is happening and that, let's be honest, it's all a bunch of theater, because they have the votes and they likely will confirm her. But because it's a midterm year, and because, and I'm sorry, Ketanji Brown Jackson, I realize I should say the full name, because it's an election year and because she will pass and she has all of the qualifications that anybody would need, what's basically happened is that certain people who want to make waves ahead of their elections and going into the 2024 presidential elections have decided that now, during a nationally televised event with the historical precedence of the first black woman to be nominated and likely confirmed to the Supreme Court of the United States, as an attempt to find very specific areas of the law and cases and bring them up in graphic detail for the purpose of making the judge answer. What's the point of all this? Why is Josh Hawley and all the other people in this entertainment wing deciding to dig into these very specific cases about that the judge ruled on involving, very emotionally charged, disturbing parts of the law and criminal justice system, including child pornography? Despite the fact that the information about why they talk about the sentencing guidelines and how she, like other people that those same Republicans also voted for, have done the same things based on the same logic, but now because it's right now and because it's a TV camera, they can shamelessly forget all that and try to attack this judge, accusing her of being soft on child predators. I watch Eric Erickson just now talk about this is great because Senator Marsha Blackburn asked her for the definition of a woman, and she didn't, frankly, as I think is pretty obvious, buy into what she was doing. Marsha Blackburn is not what I would call smooth. She's very much a team player, but she's not very smart. And she's not very charismatic, and she very much plays the partisan card because it's the only card she has. And it's like when you watch this conversation and you see their facial expressions, and Marsha Blackburn doesn't actually care what she's going to say, right? This whole line of questioning is not really a line of questioning. It's a series of attacks designed to smear her political opponents. No, it's simply a matter of trying to score political points, knowing that she's going to get confirmed anyway, and this gives them an attempt to show everybody how tough they are on the Democrats. And frankly, for the Democrats, it's the same thing in reverse, as they dealt through, the Supreme Court hearings during the Trump era, which I will say Gorsuch was not necessarily as intense, but after seeing the Kavanaugh hearings and how they were handled, and of course, at the time, being in Washington to lobby for unrelated reasons, seeing the waves of people and all the women that were there to speak to the senators, particularly, the other women senators, It seems very disingenuous to try to say, paint it as this woman who's very obviously legally accomplished isn't answering this question because she knows it's a trap. But instead of just acknowledging that, you're trying to make Marsha Blackburn look like she's the smart one here, when she's obviously not. No one would put Ketanji Brown Jackson and Marsha Blackburn anywhere on the same intellectual footing at all. However, she happens to be the senator chosen by the people and sits on this committee, and therefore she gets to ask these questions. Them's the rules, but don't pretend that her questions are relevant or that this was ever going to be a serious line of inquiry from her. And frankly, after watching Josh Hawley and Mike Lee, the other two senators, really dig in on this topic of the child predators and the child pornography cases, again, knowing full well that they voted on the same judges who ruled the same way in the same cases, are going after her because they know there are very few issues as emotionally charged and create such a visceral response as the sentencing for people charged and convicted of crimes related to harming children, including in these cases, child pornography. But we have to ask ourselves some uncomfortable questions about how much do you think about these crimes? What should the sentencing be? And to be clear, when talking about the criminal justice system, the idea of, sentencing guidelines and mandatory minimums being overly excessive is not a new concept. It's been discussed repeatedly, including by the very sentencing commission that Mrs. Jackson was on, or Judge Jackson was on, along with other people who were also on the commission and know these exact things. And this is part of the madness of it, is that this is very clearly not an actual serious inquiry into her judicial philosophy. They found the most emotionally charged cases that they could find. They take what is a fairly legal, technical, complex issue and try to spin it as judges soft on child predators. Specifically to say Democrats support judges who are soft on child predators, thus soft on crime, thus crime is rampant, blah, blah, blah. You see how it all fits together. It's really a very seamless talking point. But the fact that they went directly to such a graphic and disturbing series of cases right off the bat, it's very telling. And let's be clear, what's happening is that this judge, the well-qualified, forced black judge to be nominated for the Supreme Court, black female judge to be nominated for the Supreme Court, they can't stop it from happening. And they know they can't just overtly attack her on general judicial issues such as, cases involving the right to choose or abortion or other things like that. No, if they want to make serious damage and they want to pander to the people that are going to, be the most angry about this, they're going to do the most emotionally charged things imaginable. Now, they talked about Guantanamo Bay, but she was a public defender, and Guantanamo Bay is a whole other legal quandary that they know about. But again, it's another cheap talking point. But again, they're not really hammering on that as much as they are in this child pornography cases. And because they know, the more they talk about it, the more that they mention the specifics of the case, and they keep talking about the heinous of the crimes, they don't actually let her answer the question, right? They won't actually let the reasoning go through. This is just an attack on her doing specific cases. And really, as a cynical political strategy, it's brilliant. Right? All you're doing is taking cases that she ruled on, picking the parts of it that you want, framing it in the worst possible context, not allowing the judge to respond or knowing that her response will be, technical and legal like most judges would do, and using this to create a perfect clip for Fox News and fundraising for everybody else to say, look how tough these people are, look how weak this judge is on crime. The Democrats are weak on crime. It's all there. It's all part and parcel of the strategy. Now, the other side of this is that you see, you watch The View and you watch how other people are seeing her be treated, and they're angry. They're angry because they feel that, Brett Kavanaugh got to get away with whatever. But this judge, who frankly has more, at least my understanding, far more actual experience being a judge than Kavanaugh does, is facing much stricter questions. And of course, we all remember that the Brett Kavanaugh hearing went from being about his judicial philosophy to alleged assault, which resulted in testimony by Christine Blasey Ford, and of course, other accusations to spring up, which turned it into a much bigger circus. And frankly, one of the most infuriating things about these Supreme Court hearings is that it's obviously important who sits on the Supreme Court, because these 9 people decide what is and is not constitutional. Right? And that's an immense amount of power. So you want the people on the court to be people who have a thorough understanding of the law, respect for the Constitution and the process, and not be afraid to look past the partisan affiliation of the person that nominated them and focus on interpreting the law through the Constitution. But of course, it's a political process, meaning that there's going to be politics involved. And that also means that the minority party, which is not in charge, can use this opportunity to, not ask questions or frame the questions to attack their political opponents, or use the most narrow aspects of one's career to try to disqualify them. And when with Kavanaugh, the votes were there, and due to the nature of the circus involved, he's going to be on the court. And, that's going to be part of it, and that's obviously, feelings are hurt. But then, they nominated Amy Coney Barrett and confirmed her not very long after Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. So the Supreme Court nominations are all a power game. I think it's sad that the court knows that it has to go through this to do its job of interpreting the Constitution. But that's the way the cookie crumbles. Is that when there's a vacancy, the president gets to pick, and the Senate gets to advise and consent and vote on this. And there's just too much opportunity to engage in politics and score as many political points as possible, particularly if you're both shameless and an opportunist. If you're Josh Hawley or Marsha Blackburn, you're obviously partisan and you're obviously trying to score points and trying to be a good team player. If you're Lindsey Graham, you probably have a personal vendetta after the Kavanaugh hearings, and other people have personal vendettas. And you know what? If you're watching these hearings, and frankly, I see fellow Republicans and conservatives watch these hearings and their responses and say, you know what? These all seem like reasonable questions. I don't see what the problem is. The left is the one that has the problem here. But really, what people are taking away from this isn't that this judge isn't answering these very specific questions. What they're taking away is that these guys are being assholes to a qualified person because they can be assholes. In fact, it's because that's what their constituents want. They know she's qualified, so they're just going to take the most problematic aspects they can find and blow them up, whether it's talking about books by authors that's in libraries of the schools of the boards they're on, and asking if babies are racist, to other stupid questions, which what if any of this has to do with, the Commerce Clause or civil forfeiture or any other things that the Supreme Court might actually deal with. Because, of course, this whole process is, while important, it's already been decided. They have the votes. She's historic. She's qualified. She's going to be on. The Republicans know it. And because they know it, they can take this opportunity to throw as many red meat questions as they can to try to get on the news, get on Fox, get on Breitbart, get on wherever, have their clips be shown repeatedly, and of course, send them out in emails for fundraisers. So, the Supreme Court hearing, we're not going to learn anything. She's testified multiple times. None of these questions ever came up before. We all know what's happening. We all know it's a charade. We all know that she's going to go on and be probably very good. She'll probably have some excellent opinions and bring great insight. Frankly, I'd vote for her if I was there. And I see the dishonesty behind these attacks. And I just think it's because they may believe that this is a good idea, but it's not. And you know what? Call me crazy, but back in 2018, I believe that Kavanaugh had become problematic. Even if some of the accusations against him that had been leveled against him were kind of outrageous, the fact are, some of the ones that had were very credible. And they decided that, hey, just force it. Be a team player and force it through. Because that's what matters. Having people on the court that you think are going to rule in a way that agrees with your interpretation of the Constitution. That's what matters. Ideally, we hope the Supreme Court doesn't follow this example, but we all know that it kind of does. Not all the time. They're all independent people. They can vote in surprising ways, but it's unfortunate that for them to get there, they had to go through this. It would be great if people weren't opportunists and used nationally televised hearings to ask stupid questions that people can obviously see through. But at the same time, they know that people seeing those questions are going to share them and talk about them because in their minds, any publicity is good publicity. And for the people that they're trying to reach, it'll show off their toughness and their ability to take on the system. And frankly, it's just sad that qualified people should be talking about very important topics, but instead we've got blown-ups of children's books asking if babies are racist. For the most powerful people in the country, they could ask serious questions about limits on the executive branch and the factoring of international law and all these other complex constitutional questions that these other people who are lawyers in many cases could or would know, but no, that's not entertaining. We all know what the base wants to hear. And they're going to give it to them because that's what the system is set up to do. They have the votes. She's going to get confirmed. And they're just going to try to make it as painful as possible. There should be a better way to do this. Maybe if the Supreme Court nominations and battles weren't so contentious, maybe it wouldn't be like this. But, they could also just choose to be adults. But I guess that's too hard for some people in the Senate. And, as the old saying goes, you don't need an IQ test to be in the Senate. The last thing I wanted to talk about for my quote-unquote Season 3 opener is more of a local development. One of my chief concerns I've had over these many years is that despite my ribbing of fellow Republicans, people ask me why I'm still involved with the Republican Party. And, I would be more than happy to tell them my saga of working within the Democratic establishment and having to deal with, crossing Mike Madigan. And the reason, of course, for bringing him up is that he's recently featured for being indicted on 22 different counts, including racketeering, bribery, and other host of corruption charges. A little late in the game at this point, but what's interesting is that after these charges were released, you had all of these Democrats acting shocked that the person that controlled most of the state party was somehow involved in this kind of illicit activity in the first place. And mind you, these very charging documents explain that even while the former Speaker of the House, Mike Madigan, was corralling Democratic support from every corner, he was engaged in a criminal enterprise. The Madigan Enterprise, as it's noted in the charging documents. Now, mind you, for many people, and the Illinois Republican Party especially, was that they have been beating the drum on this kind of corruption for years. And it's not as if it's completely unsurprising. You see similar charges with Ed Burke years ago. There's this whole problem with these people being representatives and also having law firms that do business and make contracts with people, and they can steer business towards one another, and for some reason it's all perfectly legal. And if anybody in Illinois, if anybody's listening is from Illinois, they're well aware of the property tax situation. But if you're not, let me tell you, the state of Illinois for years has basically left it to local districts to approve of their school funding. So if you lived in a nice community, your schools had a lot of money, and if you didn't have a large tax base, your money came from the state. And the state of Illinois, prior to the new funding formula being generated during the Rauner administration, wasn't necessarily dispersing the funds as well as they could have, I guess you could say. And sure enough, I want to remind people that when the former Speaker of the House, Michael Madigan, was trying to maintain his seat again, there's often talk about there were 19 Democrats who held out and wouldn't vote for him. And these 19 are often seen as the people who helped get rid of Mike Madigan. What should be more concerning to you is that he had nearly 55 members who were willing to give him that position of power again, despite all of this stuff being well known, and despite numerous documents and scandals going back, nearly a decade. From Metra to hiring people to ghost payrolls to covering up sexual harassment to abusive staff. All of these things, on top of the, crimes that have been alleged now, all of these things were out in the open, but everyone was more than happy to look away because he provided the money, he provided the staff, he got the appropriations done. Even now, a bunch of projects that were installed by him that were temporarily frozen by the Pritzker administration has now been released over concerns that, that the people that this money is for are going to be affected by it, even though it was done by someone who's currently facing federal criminal charges. This is the problem, is that the system, even though Mike Madigan is no longer in charge of the Illinois Democratic Party, right, the system he built the millions upon millions of dollars he controlled and funneled, the near universal Democratic control of the state in every conceivable aspect. These are all parts of his legacy. Between the maps that have been aggressively drawn, the campaigns to take out everybody at the state level, from Judy Barr to Pinka to Governor Rauner to Mark Kirk, the ability to have Democrats be installed everywhere because of this machine that, as we know, was entangled with corruption and crime. And to hear most of them talk about it, you would think that none of them ever actually had anything to do with it. They just took his money and his marching orders, and they took his staff, and all they had to do was vote for him to be speaker and never cross him. But, between this and another Democratic state senator recently resigning after pleading guilty to federal charges, there's multiple other aldermen and people in the General Assembly, people in the Chicago City Council. There's people all over the state embroiled in corrupt activities, and this is part of the reason that even though we have, the state's credit rating is bounced up, bills are being paid, and all the federal money being thrown around, along with, marijuana and gambling revenues being up, has given the state the ability to start making some fiscal progress. People still do not have trust in the system. And it's because, for all these years, it was led by Michael Madigan. Now that J.B. Pritzker is the new money man and has, all the money in the world to throw to himself and to the Democratic Party if needed, I suppose Mike Madigan no longer is untouchable, and they no longer need to defend him. And frankly, as a political weapon, I don't see why the Republicans wouldn't talk about him. I would. Let's be clear, up until very recently, and up until it became perfectly clear that they could no longer support him, the vast majority of the Democrats did support him, and would be more than willing to have him be in the House speakership right now, which means he would have been speaker and then arrested by the feds for the same crimes he was committing. We knew this was happening. We knew it after the ComEd criminal procedures came out and the criminal fine. This has all been well documented. And yet, the Illinois Democratic Party basically acts like Madigan did nothing wrong, or they never heard of him. Never knew him, never talked to him, never spoke to him. Even though he's instrumental in the vast majority of them being where they are, particularly those in the suburbs who are able to avoid taking controversial votes because he was always able to stack them up. He would always get people to vote for the tough legislation. Usually, I'll send you money, I'll send you staff, and if you can't do it, I'll cover you so you don't have to. But I'll also send you money and staff. I'll have someone else fill in so we have enough. And yet, through all these years, when Bruce Rauner was there trying to help make the state be a better place, these same people stuck by him, despite the fact that he was in the middle of a criminal enterprise. It's one thing to see my fellow Republicans out here still defending Trump to this point. He was the president, and this, even with everything that happened after January 6th, and I remember seeing this in a critique of the National Review, and I think it was very poignant. National Review, I think, covers a lot of people who want to support, not necessarily support Trump, but they feel that his authoritarianism is not as big of a threat as the left's progressive ideology. And they're more concerned with that than they are with Donald Trump. And I think for many Democrats, it's the same thing here in this state. They're afraid of voting for the Republican option because many Democrats have convinced them that all the Republicans are Trump sycophants and will do whatever he says, and we're all out to get you and attack you based on critical race theory and all these other attack points. And really what the Republican Party of the state should be just saying is, hey, the other party is corrupt. Literally. The people who define this party, which were up until last year Michael Madigan and now J.B. Pritzker, they both have been the subject of federal investigations. J.B. Pritzker's family money comes from a history of being able to avoid taxes. And Michael Madigan's history is from using the tax structure to his advantage for personal gain. I would think that would be enough for most people to not vote, but, one thing I've also learned is that despite having all the facts available, and despite knowing full well what the people they're voting for have done, and all of the bad that goes with that, many people still do it anyway. They vote for Trump, they vote for Madigan, they vote for Mayor Burns, they vote for whoever they think is, because unfortunately the system ultimately leaves us with some sort of binary choice, and often the binary choice leads to who's the incumbent, who's my preferred political party, because the other one is probably worse. And it's sad that many people would rather choose the corrupt option that's of the same partisan affiliation than someone of a different affiliation who may actually listen to them but disagree on policy matters. I'm sure not everybody wants to hear that or believes that that's even, fairly representative of what's going on, but, I just think that, personally, if the Illinois Democratic Party continues to go unchallenged and continues to basically have no competition at all, the state will suffer, because what you get is you get these giant power structures, aka the Madigan Enterprise, which uses the state party and its operations to help enrich people, including Madigan and his associates. These people are now, quote-unquote, gone and facing criminal charges, but, much how The Wire ends with a lot of different faces but the roles being the same, this is sort of how it feels with state government. Yeah, the faces have changed, but have the roles really changed that much? There's still an inordinate amount of power in the House speakership. The Illinois Democrats control every branch of government with supermajorities. The best bet that Republicans have is to win a statewide office and maybe break the superminority status in either chamber. That's literally the best hope that they have. Because the odds that they could even take back enough seats to possibly affect one of the houses is just, it's not going to happen. And that's partially responsible because of Mike Madigan and his years of getting Republicans forced out at all levels, of basically taking advantage of the demographic changes in Illinois to take the suburbs with his city organization and leave the Republican Party to fight it out in rural areas, packing us together, making, run against each other, or splitting up precinct by precinct as they have at the local level here. And, it's more of the same petty political games that people are tired of hearing about. And frankly, I hope that this year, in a year in which Trump is no longer supposed to be relevant and we have inflation and crime and issues that have been left over from the pandemic and the corruption, that Illinois Republicans might be able to make some gains this year. However, I'm not necessarily super hopeful. The money game has pitted some people against others, and frankly, 3 of the candidates have all the funds for governor and everyone else is struggling. I don't know if the billionaires in place will be be able to control everything like they did the last time. We'll see what happens, but as of now, despite having a winning hand available, I'm concerned that the Illinois Republican Party is stuck between trying to defend the former president and trying to convince people in our state that the Democratic Party has led us astray for too long. But JB's got the money. The Democrats have the money. They have the numbers. And if we put up terrible candidates who have bad messaging and want to relay outdated, old information, then we're not going to do well. I can only hope that things will be better, but, no promises. Again, while they have been trying to, and with more success this year, to put more people on the ballot, that's the first step. And we'll see what happens when these primaries are over and we get into the general election, but I'm hopeful that with a new crop of people and trying to get every race to have a competition in it, we could have better people and better ideas and a better overall system of governance. The first step is for us to stand up, stand by our principles, and know that we have to go out and make a difference in the world. That's all from me right now. I am, like I said, I am working on some other stuff. Some of it's in relation to things I wrote last year, and hopefully I'll be able to get that up for you soon. It's an interesting story to say the least. It's more local, and it's got, there's going to be people I'm talking to, so hopefully that story comes out soon, and I look forward to getting it out with you and getting all that information put together in a way that you find entertaining and informative. So again, thank you to all the listeners who are out there. I appreciate your time, your conscience, and your trust in me for me to tell you the truth as I see it. Take care, and until the next time.